when we're imagining our job, it consists of mainly tasks, problems, and opportunities. Tasks are often repeat things, so repeat things that have to be done. Problems are basically issues that come up. Maybe the bot's not working, or maybe you have this fire, and everybody in business is firefighting, right? People are still going to be firefighting in deep into the future as well. But those tasks are probably going to get automated away. And then there's opportunities. So different things for growth strategies, maybe new creative questions. If you're thinking, what if we did this way? And it's like this creative idea that you might actually go after, that's an opportunity that you can then chase. So spending a little bit more time on problems and opportunities, spending less time on repetitive tasks. It's the trend here. And that's 2025 through 2030, the era that we're in now. The next piece of this is understanding this report from the World Economic Forum. So when I say these things about how there's probably not going to be a lot of job loss in this 2025 to 2030 period, I'm not just saying that. This is the Future of Jobs report by the World Economic Forum, and they're actually predicting that there will be more jobs created than jobs destroyed. So all the people who are saying like, oh man, everyone's going to lose their jobs to AI, that's not what it looks like in terms of the data. And it's not what it looks like in terms of the tech either. I think this is the era of AI productivity where you see massive productivity gains, but you don't see the job loss. Job loss potential could come later, and I'll talk about that. But this period, 2025 to 2030, AI productivity. And so that's the skill to focus on. That's the thing, that's the skill to build, is understanding how you can use that to your advantage. And then the other piece here is the share of tasks and how they're being done. There's tasks done by people, tasks done in a combination, and tasks done by technology. You can see that that shifts from now to 2030, where the tasks done by technology was 22%. Now it's projected to be 34%. Then you've got combination tasks, 33%, or 30% jumps to 33%. And that share of people doing tasks at 47% drops down to 33%. And that's just people doing that. That's not combination of people and technology. That's just people tasks. So I think that's the important trend to wrap your head around, is that these tasks are changing and it's going to be more technology involved in the tasks. And then this is the one where I was saying, Scott, you kind of read ahead, not really, but you saw into what I was going to talk about, which is the top 6 skills according to the World Economic Forum actually are AI and big data, networks and cybersecurity, technological literacy, creative thinking, resilience, flexibility, and agility, curiosity, and lifelong learning. So those 6 skills are just right in line with what we've been talking about.
Absolutely. And I think one is we talked about last month that's on there is lifelong learning as well. So I think it's just fantastic.
I mean, if you're looking for the skills that you should be prioritizing to set yourself up, these are the ones. Especially when I talk about tech literacy, your understanding of technology, that's a big one. When I talk about AI and big data, that's a big one. Try to wrap your head around these things as best you can. There's a ton of tools out there to do it. And if you want a community there to discuss it, Annovation community is there for you. And Annovation, like the business, is also there too. That's what I do, tech and strategy.
Something that just keeps coming to mind to me, or has recently, in thinking about this kind of shift of tasks. I love that chart showing the tasks that'll move from just people to technology. Is I heard something a couple of months ago about how a huge number of management roles really didn't exist. Like however many years, I think it was something in like the 70s, there was really the beginning of a boom of management type roles as technology changed and like the skills that workers are doing in workplaces change. And I feel like now we're kind of seeing, and at that time, like tech skills were also important. And as things changed, as email came around in the 90s, that really shifted what kind of skills a manager needed and how much if you got the number of memos on your desk in a day, I assume that we now get in emails. In the 70s, it probably would have disrupted some workflow and needed some changes in that. Then we've gotten into like, you get 300 emails a day, and that's part of you spend half your time doing emails. I feel like now we're kind of seeing that pendulum swing to where technology's gotten to a point where, okay, management roles are shifting again, and the execution roles are shifting again, and the way that technology is adding and removing work from our scope is also going to change. And so it's really, I mean, taking a step back, things are changing, but they're always changing. And the way things are now versus 2050, I mean, the pace is just going to just keep getting faster and faster. But it also is kind of, it's part of a bigger trend, and it's just the waves of how work is, especially with technology as part of it.
Well, and one of the things that's really interesting too, to add on to that point, do you know middle management wasn't really a thing until like we had the titans of industry like Rockefeller and those types of businesses? So, and that's like early 1900s. So that just wasn't a thing. And then we actually started to create middle management because we had companies that were big enough to warrant it. And then going beyond that, then you start to get into this internet age where the internet starts to come along, computers start to come along. That really changes the game. And I think a lot of people imagine this AI is just automating so many jobs away, but we've already had all these different softwares come in and change the way that we do work today. Like if you look at something like Asana, or if you look at some of these other different productivity platforms that are just helping us do better management, and actually they're taking a lot of those tasks and automating them away already. So we've already had this big software push that is automating a significant number of tasks. Now, the thing that I think is interesting is we went through that whole change, but we didn't freak out about it because we just didn't have a nice word to latch onto it with. And we didn't really even identify it that much. Now we've got this fancy word of AI, but like really some of it's just going to be software taking your job, like not taking your job. I have to be careful here. Not taking your job, taking your tasks. And that's kind of the reframe, is these things are going to take your tasks. They're not necessarily going to take your job. They will take your job if your job does not consist of anything more than tasks.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I think it's important to think about what does your job encompass other than just the repetitive tasks.
Absolutely. And I think it'll also take it if you can't embrace it in a way where, if you're still spending 80% of your workday, 50% of your workday checking emails, when everyone else has figured out how to automate that and streamline it and be able to focus on those opportunities and problems, then okay, you're also at risk. And that's where it really is, having that agile mindset, I think, is really important.
Well, and staying on the forefront, like you're pretty safe if you stay on the forefront of the technology. So if you keep up with the technology, you're pretty safe. And then where it gets risky is when you actually end up getting behind. So the risky point is actually, I think of COVID as a good example of this. It was kind of this filter moment where any company that was not digitized enough then had to figure out very rapidly how to digitize.
Hmm.
But you could have been fully remote before, or you could have had the ability to be fully remote before. But that that change then just forced being able to be remote. It was like a filter moment. And I wonder if how many of these things are going to have a similar pattern where if you're up to date with the technology, you're going to be okay. But then there's kind of these filter moments that kind of make it a little bit harder if you're not up to date with the technology. Another version of that would be it would be fine if you didn't have a website back in 1990. But if you don't have a website now, it's like why don't you have a website? There's an expectation of keeping up with technology as well that ends up happening over time. And so the consumers demand a level of technology in a business. I think that's the same type of thing that ends up happening on the employer side. The employers expect a certain level of technological competency as well. So if you stay up to date in your business or as an employee on technology, I think it's going to be a big benefit to you.
Absolutely. And I would say if your business isn't, as an employee, if if your business isn't keeping up to date, taking the time outside of your workplace, like if there's just structures in place, they don't want to embrace it. I think it is a really valuable skill to invest time on your own and keep those skills up to date because it is a more insecure job market. People leave work faster and are gaining these skills really rapidly, and you don't want to get in a position where you find yourself suddenly without the skills that other folks have gained in other workplaces and trying to compete with them.
I do want to comment, though. I don't want anyone that might be online or listening to this later to think that you need to absolutely be at the forefront of emerging technology. I've been in different industries where they're technology laggards, and sometimes it's for many good reasons. And some of it could be, I don't want to mess with it until the kinks are all worked out, or I'm concerned about cybersecurity in this particular area. In my career, particularly with operations, specifically financial institutions, so the fintech world and healthcare were both technology laggards. It had to be proven outside of their test that it was safe, secure, and effective. So I just wanted to make sure that we all knew that it's not just the most technologically savvy people that are going to be the success of the future. There's a number of different people that come in or insert themselves at different times, but you got to keep up on it. You can't lose the competence of what's going on around you.
Mhm. Well, and I think there's a really important distinction which I didn't clearly make, which is there's a difference between when you adopt it into your business or when you adopt it into everything and when you learn about it. I think you should be learning about these things as much as you can, as soon as you can, so that you're aware of them and you know how to make good decisions around them. But when you adopt it, totally up to you. You can adopt it later, but the important thing is that you learn about it so you can actually make an informed decision. Because it's really hard to know when to use a hammer if you don't know how to use a hammer.
Good point.
So that gets us into phase two, which is this 2030 to 2035 phase. And this is where I think you'll see a lot more robotic productivity. We're already starting to see it sprinkled around, but I think it's going to get really prevalent 2030 to 2035. And this is the point where I think we'll see a lot of jobs that are actually automated because the manual tasks are automated. Now, that doesn't mean that the full job goes away. That just means that the manual tasks of the job are probably gone. And so figuring out what are the other elements of that job that this person can do, or what are the pivots of that job? What are the different pieces of it? If you get displaced by autonomous vehicles, can you be some type of fleet champion where you're managing a fleet of autonomous vehicles, something like that? There's iterations of jobs, and I think that's when you get to these robotic automations, it gets a little bit harder because the task of the manual labor constitutes so much of the job that just takes up much of what the job is. So this is where I think a lot more people will think career pivots, things like that, and actually changing what their job is called. And so when you look out to this 2030 to 2035 timeframe, you've got autonomous vehicles, you've got autonomous delivery. There's a company called Zipline. Definitely recommend looking them up. You've got autonomous factories and autonomous assistants. So think your humanoid robots that are running around doing other random manual labor. Now, the full system that seems to be getting worked toward is kind of this automated supply chain system where it's the automated vehicles with the autonomous or the autonomous vehicles with autonomous delivery, with autonomous factories. So you have the full manufacturing supply chain and logistics end all taken care of by robots. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be humans in the loop here. There's going to be humans in the loop, but this system might end up being very heavily automated. So if you are like the person who is doing the repetitive manual task, that is the place that I would be cautious of uh, staying in that 2030 to 2035 range when I think it might get automated. And then the 2035 to 2040 phase. This is where we get into the weird stuff because this is where, depending on how things shape out, we might not actually need full employment to meet the demands of the population, meaning we don't have to actually have that amount of employment. But people still want to do things. So people are still going to do things that create value for others. We're just probably not going to need that level of employment to necessarily just get all the things that need to get done. So this is where you move away from things that are essential jobs to more things that are kind of, I don't want to say recreational, but things that kind of build up humans in general that aren't the basic necessities that we need to live. And so I think that, like, you look at influencers today. Influencers were not a thing before. Well, they were in a way, but not the same way that they are today. But that's changed a lot, where that's a whole new category of where anyone could make money talking on any subject that they're interested in. So that's a that's not an essential job, but a very that's a very different job that was created out of social media. And I think we could see a lot more of these things exist. Um, and that's kind of the core thesis of the 2040 jobs list is what are those new value additive things where, say, we have this bulk of other jobs taken up. What are the new value creation things that people can still do and leverage? For example, there's someone who sells air on social media. They sell jars of air. It's like, it's a joke product. But the thing is, that person could probably actually make a living on that at some point. So, maybe they're not the most essential jobs, but there's still things that we do that add value to the world in some way. And how this ties into the whole weird economic restructuring thing, though, is that there are these ideas out there in the world of UBI and UBN, universal basic income and universal basic needs. A lot of people talk about them like they're coming in like 2030 or they're coming in 2035, but I think that's probably further out. It's in this 2035 to 2040 range if we do anything about that at all. So I think don't count on something like that. Try to think about the ways that you can actually set yourself up in your career to operate without that. And then if it comes down to we have a UBI or a UBN system where it's like an income distribution or everybody gets a home or something like that, that's great. You can use that to your advantage. But don't don't count on that and expect that to be a thing.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point too, because uh, as I mean, this gets into much bigger questions and pictures, and on the topic of UBI, and I think we're seeing some of this now. I think as workers feel that fear and pressure on their employment and ability to provide for themselves, we're seeing more political engagement and people putting pressure, asking those questions of why is the work I've done not serving me, or how can I have it serve me personally better? And I see, yeah, I think you can do a lot with your career, but there does need to be these bigger picture restructuring. It should be, we're going to have the resources, arguably we already do, to have these structures that do provide for everyone. Being able to come together as a community and advocate for that and have that happen, I think will be really critical to really getting, I mean, I think it's critical from a human perspective and a community perspective, but also just from a let's how do you get the value from these resources and these tools and these innovations to progress the technology and society. We need to be investing in that, thinking of people as people with needs that need to be met, and it's a big restructure opportunity.
Well, and the age of abundance is a real thing. Like we really could hit this age where we have so much surplus like ability to create things that we can really provide for everyone. Now the question is when if we get to that point, we have to get to the abundance point first where we have plenty of resources before we start looking at these types of systems. I think there's this idea out there right now. People hear UBI and they hear UBN and they think, oh man, I don't have to work anymore. And they just kind of like tune out and like, say, yeah, they're gonna pay for me later, and I'm gonna have this universal basic income, and it's gonna be great. And people check out ahead of time. And I just want to caution people that this is probably gonna take a long time, and just don't count on it coming. Just you can advocate for it and you can push for it, but don't let it get you into this apathy of thinking, oh yeah, eventually I will have this. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible. So the thing that I want to point out here is that we can work less if we want to. So this is the long trend from 1870 down into 2017. So this is annual working. So 2,000 hours, that's 40 hours per week, and 1,000 hours, that's 20 hours per week with a 2-week vacation. So if you look at those markers and you see where we used to be in 1870, and you go forward into 1900, 1940, 1980, 19 and then into 2017, you can see that we've trended down from this 3,000 hours into 2,000 hours, and now we're sitting around that 1,500 mark. We're sitting between 1,500 and 2,000. Now, this trend line is pretty clear that it's trending down. So I think when you're looking out into the future for jobs and careers, maybe you do work less. Maybe you do work something closer to those 20 hours per week. That doesn't mean you have to work less, but that means you have the option to work less. So I think it's very possible that we end up closer down to that 1,000-hour mark. So that 20 hours per week. Then I want to go through a couple job scenarios here. So these are a couple scenarios that I've seen that I think are interesting to just point out. So places where an expert becomes scalable, think of a doctor reaching more patients. Places where an expert becomes the creative, think of like a chef that then designs meals for a robotic kitchen. That chef was not the well, I guess was kind of the creative, but becomes more creative, becomes more of the creative person in the room rather than just the conductor. Then you have the machine is not trusted. Would be roles where like a dental hygienist or like a hairstylist. I think those roles will be around for a very long time, just because we don't trust a machine to do that, to be in your mouth or have scissors near your head. I think it'll take some time before we get there. Then there's places where the machine is not ideal. I think the outdoor guide is a good example here, like a raft guide, or places where the human provides a better customer experience. Maybe a restaurant server, though that could be automated, but there's other versions of that where like the human provides a better customer experience that will probably keep the human around as a working person rather than automating fully. Then there's also split roles where you have the human plus the AI. I think of this from the coaching perspective. So if you go into sports, you could have a human coach and you could have an AI coach that work together. The AI coach being more of the statistical analysis, the human coach focusing more on the human element.
Yep, I think that's spot on.
I love this.
And so I think those could really work together to kind of form this whole system that we have. And that's not just for sports. The human plus AI thing, I think, could be different levels. You might have a human CEO and an AI CEO. You might have different human manager, AI manager. All of these different things, you might have that. A lot of them, you might have this human and AI role. they're separate from each other but complement each other.
I love this. And I think this also illustrates too some of the potential that job creation. Like this the top run, doctor reaches more patients. Now it's a doctor. And in
Yep.
that immediate scenario, in the future, it's a doctor, it's the person who has developed the system that's being used and manages the system and oversees it. And ultimately, ideally, are also now it's now able to do more and better, and maybe there's a more human connection, or it frees up the doctor for more bedside manner opportunities, things like that. And I love that.
Exactly. And one of the pieces here too to note is this intrusive text spectrum, which I think is a really good proxy. This is my own thing. This isn't something that someone put up on the internet, but the intrusive text spectrum is kind of one of my frames for understanding how fast a technology is likely to get adopted. And each person has kind of their own intrusivity tech spectrum. So these things might fall in different spots, but generally it's how much does this tech reach into your life, and actually does it make you feel uncomfortable? Is it too intrusive? So things like factory robotics, drone delivery, home robotics, and brain chips being all the way on this side, and then factory robotics being all the way on the other side.